Well, as they say, all good things must come to an end. Which means today we will be saying goodbye to the land of Italy. If you've been following along with this series, you'll know we've met all kinds of saints going all the way back to the early church, including St. Peter, St. Paul, and even the man himself, Pope Francis. But before we fly back to the States, there's one more saint we have to pay our respects to, this time dating back to the 15th century. So back in the day, there was a girl named Margherita who was born in this little mountain town known as Cascia. When Rita was only 12 years old, she was married off to some rich guy named Paolo Mancini. Common practice at the time, but that did not make it okay, especially since little Rita wanted to be a nun instead. Paolo wasn't exactly the best husband either, to say the absolute least. Divorce wasn't exactly an option though, as you can probably imagine, which meant the only other option was to work on making a change. And since Rita was a woman of strong Christian values, she always had the power of forgiveness on her side. After lots of prayer and meditation, she was able to convince Paolo to see the errors of his ways and give up on his abusive behavior. Never say never, I guess. They had 2 sons together who they raised in the Catholic Church. But the only problem was, they were feuding with another family in the region, known as the Cecchi family. Eventually, a member of the Cecchi family stabbed Paolo to death, effectively murdering him in cold blood. That wasn't enough for Rita to stop having compassion, though. She forgave the man who murdered her husband and publicly pardoned him at Paolo's funeral. But you know who didn't forgive them? Why, Paolo's brother, of course. He wanted revenge against the Cecchi family, and he tried convincing Rita's sons to come join him. Rita knew exactly how this was going to turn out, though, and that's why she prayed for their souls, asking God to take away their sin, along with any act of violence that might take place in the future. A year later, both of her sons died from dysentery. Looking back, some people speculate that God answered her prayers by allowing them to die naturally. That way, they wouldn't have the opportunity to commit any kind of mortal sin. Was this an act of divine intervention? Do the ends justify the means? Who's to say? Some questions are just too big for us sinful servants to try and answer. Now, with her entire family gone, Rita decided to make the best of it. In fact, she decided now was the time to fulfill her lifelong dream of becoming a nun. She tried working at the local monastery, but was immediately rejected. Turns out, if you're not a virgin and your husband's been murdered by a rival family, it's like they don't want nothing to do with you.
Why are you closed? Tell us why you're closed!
Like, what's up with that, man? The heck? But as always, Rita just shook those haters off. She prayed to her 3 favorite saints, St. Nicholas, St. Augustine, and St. John the Baptist, and asked for their help in laying this whole feud to rest. And sure enough, it worked, I guess. Paolo's brother contracted the bubonic plague, which caused him to see the light and forgive the Cecchi family. Trust the process, man. And with that, Rita was allowed to become a nun and join the sisterhood, sort of. Actually, she was levitated inside the monastery by the 3 saints she'd been praying to. So imagine, you're a nun just chilling at the monastery one night, and all of a sudden this woman comes floating down in front of you. I mean, if somebody applied for a job and they came to me with that list of references, and they were floating through the night sky like some sort of saintly Superman, I wouldn't not hire them, you know what I'm saying? One night, Rita was meditating in front of an icon of Jesus, which showed him nailed to the cross. As she was praying, she asked the Lord to show her a mere fraction of his suffering. That way, she could better understand him and the love he had for his people. When suddenly, this gaping wound opened up on her forehead and started bleeding all over the place. Sure enough, it was the stigmata. For those of you who don't know, the stigmata is a mysterious wound that resembles one of the many wounds Jesus Christ was given during his passion and crucifixion. Only instead of a crown of thorns, it was a single thorn piercing through the center of her forehead. From that day forward, it just kept on bleeding, and for some reason, it wouldn't stop bleeding. And not only that, it had this really strong, pungent smell to it. The smell was so bad, and none of the other nuns wanted to share a room with her, so they kind of just abandoned her. Which, now that I think about it, is remarkably similar to when the apostles abandoned Christ when he went on trial. Unfortunately, Rita contracted tuberculosis, which left her bedridden until she died in the year 1457. After she died, her body was exhumed 3 times, but not once had her body decomposed. And not only that, she had the stigmata on her forehead every single time. From then on, her body was deemed incorruptible. Not surprisingly, she was canonized as a saint on May 24th, 1900, by none other than Pope Leo XIII, the same pope who rediscovered the remains of St. Clare of Assisi, I might add. Ever since then, St. Rita has been recognized as the patron saint of domestic abuse, motherhood, and marital problems, just to name a few. Since her body's incorruptible, that means you can spend time with her at the Basilica of St. Rita in this little mountain town of Cascia, which is about 2.5 hours northeast of Rome. Now, when it comes to the saints, normally their body would be down in a crypt somewhere, but instead, St. Rita's body is right there on full display as soon as you walk in. You can literally walk right up to St. Rita and offer her your prayers. Part of her face is covered in wax, which is honestly pretty typical for preserving such brittle saints. But the rest of her body is fully intact, inside a little glass case, with nothing else to keep her from decomposing. I made it to the Basilica just in time to have morning mass, and the opportunity to go to mass with St. Rita right there in the room with us was honestly pretty incredible. A lot of basilicas have this really old, desaturated look to them, but not this one. Here, the colors look like they're popping right out of the ceiling, which only makes you feel that much closer to the heavens above. Right next to the Basilica of St. Rita, you'll find the monastery of St. Mary Magdalene, which is where St. Rita worked as a nun. There was a friar working there who was nice enough to give us a tour of the outside. Right here you can see the house where Rita lived with all the other sisters until the day she died. There's a series of vines hanging off this part of the building. Turns out these vines were planted hundreds of years ago by Rita herself. Ever since then, the nuns and the friars have taken care of these vines so they can keep on growing. As you go further into the monastery, you can check out the garden of Saint Rita, which happens to be the same place where she was brought down by her 3 favorite saints, when she came floating down from the heavens, of course. Keep in mind, the Basilica of St. Rita sits on a mountaintop, and it's quite literally a hike in order to get there. When you're going up the mountain, though, you're bound to see some pretty cool stuff. Like this lion statue, which keeps puking up water for some reason. Now, this whole series has been about what it means to become a saint. We've looked at all kinds of different saints and all the hardships and struggles and persecutions they had to go through just so they could make it to their feast day. But one of the saints that sticks out to me the most is Saint Rita herself. Now, as I mentioned before, when Saint Rita contracted tuberculosis, she ended up being bedridden for the rest of her life. One of the few people who actually showed up to help take care of Rita was her cousin. So one day, Saint Rita asked her cousin, "Can you get me a rose from the garden, please? Por favore?" The only problem was, it was January.
Can you say snow?
So her cousin was just like, "The heck? There's not going to be any roses at this time of year." But thankfully, her cousin went and checked anyways, and lo and behold, there was one last rose right there. So ever since then, Saint Rita has become pretty much synonymous with roses. I mean, it makes sense. Roses are a sign of beauty, but they can also be a sign of growth and fertility. Now, of course, Saint Rita lived a pretty rough life. She was married off to some dude at a really young age, and forced to watch the rest of her family die off one at a time. But no matter how bad things got, her faith never stopped growing, just like a rose in the harsh cold of winter. Now, obviously, I don't know for certain, but if I had to guess, I would say there were probably times Rita thought about giving up on her faith. At some point in her life, she probably thought to herself, "I'm a good person, so why would God do this to me? And not just me, why would God do this to the rest of my family?" We've all had these kinds of thoughts, no matter how much we might try to run from them. Yet in spite of all this, she trusted in God's plan. Her faith was so strong that she blurred the line between heaven and earth. And to this very day, she's inspired others to do the same. Now, with that being said, there is one downside to Saint Rita becoming Saint Rita. These saints are elevated to a cosmic, quasi-perfect, almost demigod-like status through absolutely no fault of their own. It's so easy to forget they were once regular people like you and me. They just happened to live in really extraordinary circumstances, but they took those circumstances and they used them to their advantage, to become closer to the Almighty God. It's so easy to think, I wish there were more people like Saint Rita in the world, or I wish there were more people like Christ in the world. But here's the thing though. It's up to you to stop shifting responsibility and become more like these saints. You are the next generation of saints. You are the ones who will be remembered years from now, the same way we remember Saint Rita of Cascia. Give the world something to remember by giving God your faith. We might not always understand the bad things that happen to us, and we certainly won't be able to justify them. But one thing we can do is rely on God to help us through it. Again, just like a single rose growing in the dead of winter. After saying goodbye to Saint Rita, we said goodbye to the rest of the town of Cascia. And with that, we made our way back to Rome for one last night in the Eternal City, which ended up taking almost 4 hours since traffic was so bad. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Roman traffic. The next morning I woke up and said, Arrivederci, Italy, and flew back to the United States. This is the last picture I took of myself in Italy at around 5:30 in the morning, just as I was about to drive to the airport. But while this might be the end of our time together in Italy, it's not the end of the journey as we know it. Our quest for knowledge, wisdom, and spiritual enlightenment is never ending. In fact, it's just getting started. The best is yet to come as we learn more about the saints and the history of the church as a whole.